easier debugging, large-scale development, and more features. Three of the many glorified reasons that promoters of TypeScript use to brainwash you into a TypeScript fanboy, bowing at anyone with opposing views and climbing onto the TypeScript bandwagon. TypeScript must be the best way to build a project, right? Well, why not? Everyone is doing it, right? Yet, as of the end of 2023, both Svelte and Turbo 8 publicly announced their decisions to move away from TypeScript, bringing to light very real reasons that plague every TypeScript project. Reasons that the coding community simply choose to ignore under the temptation of developing tech just for the fun of it. But when the money stops coming and inefficiencies are measured, TypeScript fails to hold up to its promises. For those of you who are new here, you're watching the NT Nerd, and in this video, I will expose the truth behind TypeScript and why it does more harm than good, and what can you do about it. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that was introduced by Microsoft in October of 2012 with a promise to significantly decrease development time and reduce frustrations in debugging by introducing static typing into JavaScript amongst other features, which at the time were somewhat true. ES5 versions of JavaScript introduced in 2009 was notoriously difficult to debug, and TypeScript hence seemed like a knight in shining armor on its way to save JavaScript developers that were going crazy using ES5. The growth of TypeScript was further accelerated by the release of Angular 2 that used TypeScript as its primary language for development. After Angular 2, more and more frameworks started to use TypeScript as their default language, and it seemed like the way to move forward. Static typing, static return types, you can't go wrong there, can you? To be honest, TypeScript was more born out of the stubbornness of developers to move out of their existing development concepts and appreciate the free-flowing JavaScript in all its glory. JavaScript is different, it is simple, and the lack of static types makes it one of the most, if not the most, flexible language in the world today. But before we dive into the downfall of TypeScript, I think it would be an injustice to not appreciate it first. TypeScript exists for a reason, and there are things it does very well. To start off, the static typing in TypeScript means that you are less likely to make any type errors. You won't be concatenating strings instead of adding to numbers. TypeScript can, for a small project, decrease the development time since you will be getting proper linting and autocompletion. This also makes integrating third-party libraries and packages easy. Sometimes you can just walk through the integration without the need for a tutorial or a documentation. I have done this a couple of times and I did appreciate how wonderful TypeScript is. Moreover, TypeScript does make it easy to guess what each function in the code does. Enforced types and linting means that you can just hover over a code and see what kind of data do you need to pass in order for the function to work, or what kind of data is the function returning. This overall makes it easy to understand the code. But this is where my list ends, and as I'll explain in the rest of the video, a lot of the benefits I mentioned here are not really benefits most of the time. For example, yes, type safety does give you the confidence that you will be not making any type errors in your code, but you are still prone to logical errors, which means you will have to test your code anyway. So it's not really that big of a benefit. And also, since TypeScript is basically a linter for JavaScript and JavaScript is itself dynamically typed, wrong data types can still creep into your code at runtime, and your code will simply run it like it was meant to do it. So you also cannot leave out the type checking conditions in your code, even though you are coding in TypeScript. So is it really a benefit then? Well, but it has other benefits, you say. What about autocompletion? It helps us reduce time spent in development, right? Yes, the auto-completion feature in TypeScript is lovely, and personally, I'm a big fan. On the face of it, yes, it does help you develop the app quicker, but that is only if you choose to ignore the other aspects of TypeScript, like the compilation time. TypeScript is not executable by default, and it needs to be compiled to JavaScript in order to run. Now, if your project is small, you're good. But as your project gets bigger and bigger, then the insignificant compilation time starts to add up, and also the amount of resources it consumes. Check this out, for example. On the left, you have a Docker build running vanilla JavaScript, whereas on the right, you have a Docker build using TypeScript. Both of these builds have identical code. In fact, this is the backend of my own SaaS, which contains roughly around 400,000 lines of code. So it's definitely not a small project by any means. But notice how painfully long TypeScript takes to compile. Overall, the TypeScript code takes around a minute to compile, whereas the JavaScript code completes its entire build in just a couple of seconds. So does TypeScript actually help you decrease development time in a real world scenario is now the question. And my answer to that question is a very hard no. For our project, using TypeScript was a mistake, and to fix that, we nearly had to spend an entire month migrating over 400,000 lines of code from TypeScript to JavaScript. After the migration, making changes to the code meant that we now do not have to wait for an entire minute for just the code to compile. Now, let's also talk about readability for a sec. The enforced types in TypeScript does allow for better IDE tooling such as syntax highlighting, code formatting, code navigation, linting, auto-completion, and so on, which overall makes the code easy to understand. But is TypeScript more readable? Compare these two functions, for example. This is a JavaScript function, and this is the same function in TypeScript. Notice the type gymnastics you have to do to please the TypeScript compiler. Although this does make sure that the wrong data types are not passed into your function, but the sheer level of effort you have to put in to just please the IDE makes it seem like your development is more focused now on making your IDE happy rather than solving a real world problem. What all this excess junk also does is it makes your code complex and unreadable, which makes it easy for bugs to remain unnoticed. For example, I bet you didn't notice the TypeScript version of the code doesn't have a return statement. Now, if you have made it this far into the video, then you are probably either confused or furious at. Either way, it would be unfair of me to end this video without showing you a better way. So first, make sure you give me a like or a dislike depending on how you feel. And if you want to hear more from me, then consider giving me a sub. As far as solutions go, I think the Svelte team have found what I would consider the perfect middle ground, which coincidentally enough is what we decided to do with our own SaaS. If you're building a small project and don't care too much about the type safety, then you should probably just use plain old JavaScript and maybe learn TypeScript to further expand your knowledge. But if your project is picking up pace and you want to add TypeScript to your project for all its obvious benefits, then I would suggest using jsdoc instead. JSDoc combined with a TypeScript compiler means that you get all the type safety of TypeScript without the need for a compilation stage. You can directly run your code without a wait time, which both boosts your development speed as well as decreases your build time if you're using Docker like me. You will, however, need to have the tsconfig.json file and the TypeScript compiler to be installed on your system for this to work. Another key advantage of using JSDoc is that all your types can now be separated from your JavaScript code, keeping the code more readable. Some say that you have to type a bit extra for JSDoc, but I promise you that the time you spend in typing one curly brace is more insignificant than the time you have to wait for all of that to compile. Besides, modern IDE do offer a lot of auto-completion and auto-suggestions anyway, so you are not actually typing more. And here is also an additional bonus. You don't have to listen to your TypeScript compiler anymore. Anytime you feel like saying and just run the code, you can run the code. It is JavaScript after all. If you like this video and want more of me, then check out this video of me trying out the cheapest VPS service in the world and is your cloud service provider charging you extra for the services. I'll see you in the next video.